thanks so much. It is great to be with all of you, and looking forward to getting to know you a little bit today. So I'm always excited to talk about this stuff. I think I feel like the past 4 years I've been saying, I'm not sure if it's the best time to do this work or the worst time to do this work, but I think it's the best time to do this work. Things have gotten a little bit loud, and I think any way that we can have some tools in our toolkits to help us have conversations and kind of unpack this stuff, whether it's at Thanksgiving with our relatives or in our workplace or with our friend groups, I think it's really useful. And that's kind of what today is. It's kind of a little bit of a dive into some cultural lenses that we all sort of carry with us and utilize, whether we're conscious of them or not conscious. So really excited to dive into this. I will say that we're gonna move quickly through a lot of information. This is normally almost a full day class, and I'm kind of condensing it. So please, I'll make sure you know how to find me, and please don't hesitate to reach out through email, or we can set up a call if there's stuff at the end that you really want to talk more about or you want more information or more resources. So, let it be an ongoing conversation. So that said, really the purpose of this course is to talk about how we might support a strategy of building a culture of inclusion and culturally competent environments by thinking about the lenses that we bring with us, how we can create an awareness about our own cultural uniqueness, how we can increase our powers of observation about other folks' cultural uniqueness, how we can make informed decisions about our responses to those uniquenesses, and how we can ultimately build relationships. So by way of introduction, I'm going to go just through the list so folks can just kind of popcorn in any order. But if you'd be willing to share your name with us and share your pronouns, so the pronouns that you'd like us to use, and then share a quick story with us. We're going for maybe strong, not long, about either a family meal or a meal you had with friends, or a meal that was totally different from something you were familiar with. And when you're telling us, talk about kind of who was there and what you ate and where you were, but really just kind of sharing that snapshot. So is anybody feeling brave, like they want to kick us off?
I will.
Thank you so much.
I'm Andrea. She is her pronoun. She is her pronoun. Off to a strong start. So a story about a family meal. We have 3 children, 8, 6, and 3. So our family meals sort of look like a circus of happy / angry clowns, I guess maybe is a good way to put it. Yeah, I think that's really all I got in relation to that. Sometimes we eat at the table, sometimes we eat on the floor, sometimes we don't eat at all. It just see how it goes.
I love that. I'm from a family of 6 children, and I always said, I grew up in a wonderful household, but at any given time with that many kids, someone was always happy, but someone was always crying, right? It was just life was chaotic, and we often had friends in addition. So it was just, I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, chaos is a good word.
Yes, thank you. That's awesome. Thanks for kicking us off.
Well, the first thing I thought about was family. I'm from Texas originally, and big family gathering meals at my auntie's house in West Texas, with every flat surface covered in food or books or toys, or cousins hanging off the wall and under the couch, and people inside and people outside, and being fed in so many ways, getting my tummy full of good food, but just the laughter and happiness of getting to be with my extended family.
Oh, I love how you said that, getting fed in a variety of ways. That's really awesome. Thank you. And Harley, what are your pronouns?
Oh, I'm she, her, hers.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, Kelsey, it looks like we may not have Barbara at the moment or Mike. Anyone, would any of you like, oh, Kelsey's managing food. Oh, you're muted.
As I'm sure they're listening along. I'll go over mine then. Sharing a story about a meal with friends. I went off to Seattle, went to Pike Place Market, and it's all the things I love: bounty of food, fresh, exciting new tastes and trying new things. And we went after being down there to this little chowder shop, and we got to try 3 different chowders. And I was there with my ex-boyfriend and boyfriend at the time. And he said, as I was eating them, that like every time I took a bite of something that I was really happy about or excited about, that like my face just like lit up, but that like my sorrows of seeing or eating food I didn't like was equally as expressive. It's like these chowders must be bumming you out because you are just not happy at all. And it's something that stuck with me to this day, that like I really do think that I get really excited about good, exciting new flavors. But yeah, when it's bad, I don't think I can hide it very well either.
I was there a couple years ago, and the food, you're right, it's just like every beautiful, delicious food you can imagine all in one place. So amazing. I remember we went to a place that was like just macaroni and cheese, and like you think to yourself, how could that even be? But like people were lined up. It was just that good. And it was just amazing.
So many highlights.
Yeah, so good. Awesome. Thanks. Barbara or Mike, would either of you like to share? Oh, and Kelsey, what are your pronouns?
Oh, her and she.
Thank you.
I'm going to unmute Mike and Barbara just on the off chance that they don't know how to do that.
Oh, I really don't know how to do it. But I was sharing a meal right now, so that was why I was doing it. I didn't want to eat in front of you. Now, there's a lot of food is a very important thing. I've had really interesting discussions with some of the North House meals we've had. Scott Grudson's spent a lot of time, whole weekends, food classes, but we'd also spend several hours talking about food during those classes. And that's the memory. So we would spend a whole weekend with about 10 people at North House, and we would do in one case it was a large salmon that was freshly delivered from Norway, and we completely used that salmon. We did gravlax, we did lox, we did cooked salmon. It was really wonderful to see. We even, I think, peeled out the little bones. We pulled the little bones out of some of the fillets that otherwise would be a problem. So I really enjoy those kinds of things that you do as a group. I've done a lot of potlucks and group cooking type things, and they're always a memorable thing for me, regardless of particularly when you do try food from a different culture than your own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. And what are your pronouns?
Oh, he.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay.
Barbara, last but not least, I think you might be muted. There you go.
Okay. Yes, when I think of family meals, I think of both of my husbands and my family. He has a larger family. They're very social in general and as a family. And so there are, they're all down in Minneapolis, St. Paul, but there are a lot of family events that revolve around food, and everybody pitches in. So you never have to worry, you don't have to cook the whole meal, which is great. And then we have had events with both of our families and they get along well. And that is one of the gifts, I think, in my life, that the two families get along so well and really, really appreciate each other and love each other and support each other. And the food is always good. I'm also in a book club, and a number of them are foodies. Mm-hmm. And so food is important, and it's a gathering time and a talking time and a sharing time. And the food is always good. We also have belonged to a gourmet dinner group, which started almost 40 years ago. It's kind of dropped off now that we've in separate parts of the country. And that has where we bring in, there's 3 basic couples. We bring in another couple every time. It's the guest choice couple. And so, of course, the food is always good, although it's often experimental too. But that has been a time where with guest couples, there has either been camaraderie or there have been ruffled feathers, with, shall we say, different points of view, usually political, sometimes religious. And so, we're all have been, let's just say, Caucasian, but there have been differences of opinion. And I'm not sure if that counts for cultural differences or not. Well, I guess it's the family of your culture or the culture of your family or whatever. And I use the pronoun she. Thanks
Awesome.
a lot for doing this.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for that great share. And I think you bring up a good point, right? Which is that we all bring a variety of dimensions of diversity, right? And one of them might be race, but another is religion, and another one might be veteran status, and another one might be what our ethnic history is, and another one might be what our disability status is. So all of those things, some of which can be seen and some of which may be invisible. I love the idea of them kind of crashing together at the dinner table, right? And sometimes that goes really smoothly and sometimes not so much. So I think that was a perfect example. I'm married into a really wonderful but very Italian family, and they have a lot of special recipes and special kind of traditions around what you eat on certain days. Christmas Eve has to be X number of fish and different types of fish. And so I feel like I've gotten to learn a lot from my mother-in-law, who is a wonderful woman and a great cook. But if you're asking her for a recipe, she tends to say things like, I don't know, I just put some in my hand, and so if you're going for exact measurements to replicate a recipe, she's not your woman. But I've had a lot of really great experiences learning about kind of the history of why they do what they do and experiencing some new foods and even learning to make some new foods. So I always think this is a nice way to kind of do an introduction. Oh, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Because I think food is one of our universal languages, right? So we've all had experiences of a meal we really loved, eating with people we love. And I think, it's not an accident that the phrase breaking bread tends to be about sort of making relationships and making peace, right? So that sharing a meal with someone can be a way to really welcome them in, whether you've done that at a potluck or with your work team when we were all sort of with our work teams, or with a family group, and it can be a time where we really sit down, enjoy things, make relationships, and it can also be a tense time, right? Where maybe topics come up that are strange to navigate, or we have differences of opinion. But I think it can be a really great kind of not too stressful way to start to talk about our differences. So the objectives of this course are really to think about our own personal cultural competence in terms of our awareness, our attitude, our knowledge and skills as relate to the kind of cultural lenses that we'll be looking at. Maybe to talk about some of the kind of leadership ways that we can lead with these things in cross-cultural relationships. And again, cross-cultural relationship is a really broad term, right? Because we can have cross-cultural relationships in a vast number of ways. Describe how we can use the cultural lenses for different types of work situations, talk about each of the cultural lenses, and develop, we won't get to this too much today, but develop a plan of action. So that'll be sort of what you can take away and do on your own. So there's not too much housekeeping since we're online, but just remember, you can at any time stop me to ask a question. If you feel shy, you can put a question in the chat box as well, and I'll try to keep my eye on that. So, but don't be afraid to just make some noise and let me know if you have a question or a comment. And then there's 3 modules. So we're gonna, again, move kind of quickly. Please stop me. You don't get to take a break. No, you can take a break anytime you want. You're in charge of yourself at your house. Hopefully you have snacks. Hopefully you have caffeine or your drink of choice nearby. I have some caffeine today. Hopefully you know where your restrooms are located in your own space. I think just today, really, this is a nice small group. Hopefully it feels like a safe space. I like to say there's no gold star of diversity or cultural competence, right? There's no such thing as being like done with the work and you're perfectly competent and you get a gold star and everyone has to listen to you. This is work that we're all doing, and we're all doing it really imperfectly. So we're learning as we go. We're addressing new issues all the time. There are things on our radar all the time that weren't here last year or the year before. And it's a time right now that things are really volatile in our country. So let this be a space where you can feel very free to ask questions. I have a wonderful friend who says that one of the rules they keep in mind is they don't spend a lot of time feeling guilty about things they made a mistake on in the past, but nor do they let themselves off the hook for the future. So we're all learning all the time, and we don't need to beat ourselves up too much. I think that's a waste of time for things that maybe we could have done better, but we also don't get to opt out of learning and growing for the future, right? We're all obligated, in my opinion, to learn and grow. I think educating ourselves is one of the things that we have a lot of control over in a time that can feel really out of control. So I think to me, that always feels like a really positive thing. Don't wait till you have the perfect language to ask a question. So one of my favorite writers and activists was Audre Lorde, and she has a famous quote. She says, "Your silence will not protect you." And I think what she means is, staying quiet isn't a protective factor. So we don't need to sit quietly till we have the perfect language or the perfect way to ask a question. It's perfectly okay to say, I don't exactly know how to say this, or what's the right way to ask this? You do not need to sit quietly till you're perfect, or you will sit quietly forever. So do not feel the need. And I think, again, I'm a Brene Brown fan, love Brene Brown. I know lots of folks love Brene Brown. And I recently heard her remind herself and us, she said, I'm not here to be right, I'm here to get it right. So I think especially when it can come to things like diversity and inclusion and cultural lenses and equity, we can feel defensive when we misstep or when someone, corrects us. But I love that concept of really being here to get it right, right? There's no prize for being right, but that kind of ongoing commitment to getting it right is a really powerful one. So I think, really all these same things, one person at a time. We're not really unconvening, so we don't need to reconvene. I think it's great to lead with empathy. So yeah, I hope you feel really comfortable to ask questions in any way, even if it's after today ends. So awesome. Anything that's not on here that folks would like to see represented? Okay, it's not a speak now or forever hold your peace. So if you think of something, you can let me know. So the history of this course was that it really was, it is a YMCA course that, again, I think is broadly useful as well, but it really was spurred on by just increased population diversity in our communities. It really aligns with our strategy, and I think we probably all share this strategy of building cultures of inclusion. And when I say inclusion, I love this kind of visual, that the difference between diversity and inclusion is that diversity is being invited to the dance and inclusion is being asked to dance while you're there, right? So diversity is sort of getting in the room, and inclusion is someone engaging with you when you're in the room. So you might have all had experiences where you felt like you were in the room, but just barely, folks weren't engaged with you. And so I love that thought, right? So being asked to the dance and then being asked to dance while you're there. So how are we asking folks to dance? How are we really interacting in inclusion? How do we relate across cultures, which again is a really broad word, and we all carry a variety of cultures with us. And then it's really, there's a great work, Cultures and Organizations, if you find yourself in need of an academic read. The author is Hofstede, and it really talks, we're going to sort of do a gloss here, talks a little bit about how organizations can interact cross-culturally. And then we really use this course again for a lot of our team members. So to kick us off, what are you're all sitting in sort of a variety of communities. I know some of you might be in the same broader community, but I think each of us exists in a number of communities, right? There's the town or the county in which we live or the state in which we live, but we also might have a work community or a friend community or a family community, or you might move between several different communities. So in any of those communities, what changes are you seeing around you that reflect the fact that we're an increasingly global society? What are you noticing? And I'm listening. I'm just going to grab a tissue.
You can shout it out or put it in the chat section if that's easier for you too.
Yes.
I noticed that my son, my 18-year-old son, has friends that he has known for a few years now, and they get together on a regular basis, and he's never met them in person.
Yeah, how cool. Yes.
Yeah.
That's
So,
awesome.
Yeah, it just, sometimes I stop and think about, that what the possibilities of that, and it's just kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, I agree. Especially I think, man, I grew up in the 80s, right? And I remember having pen pals, having pen pal programs, and now the richness and the depth and the relative ease of communication, across spaces and even time zones is so very cool. Thank you. Oh, Kelsey, yeah. International workers, travel. Yeah, the pandemic, right? This global pandemic, and seeing and learning and watching what other folks are doing. Our remote work and distance learning. Yeah, things that, again, a couple of decades ago, even 1 decade ago, I think would have looked vastly different. Thank you.
I think we're from Minneapolis and St. Paul, and there's been huge growth in the diversity down there, which seems both enriching and challenging, different at the same time. And when we moved up here to Lutsen, there is very little diversity, and so I miss it. Up here, I know it isn't one total extreme to the other, but it seems that way to me. And so I'm glad you're having this discussion today. I think it's so important for us to understand other cultures and be more comfortable with them.
Yeah, thanks so much. You're right. Sometimes as we move throughout space, it becomes really evident, right, that there's a difference. So I'm a relatively new Duluthian. I've been here just about 3 years. And I moved from a city that was much more racially diverse than Duluth is. Duluth is probably about 97% Caucasian, about 3% African-American, and we have an Ojibwe population here. But lots and lots of white folks, and probably more so than any place I've ever lived before. And that definitely was something, even as a white person myself, something I felt when I moved here and I noticed. So I think sometimes as we move throughout spaces, that can be something that becomes evident to us. And maybe something that we feel like, oh, I miss living in a space where I saw more different types of folks, or wow, I really like being in this space where I see a variety of folks. Thank you. Yeah, I think this is, to me, this is a really great question, because there's so many, how do we, if you've ever heard the phrase transnational, thinking about being in a space where in some ways our borders and our boundaries are more permeable than ever, I could have a communication, I could be face-to-face with someone in a different country. We could say, what does it mean to be in a space where there's more Puerto Ricans living in New York than in Puerto Rico itself, right? Like the population is so vast. What a cool concept. Like, what does that mean in terms of the sharing of cultures and ideas? However, at the same time, some of our borders have become less permeable, right? So, folks trying to come into the US, right? Like, so it's a really interesting time in which in some ways we have more access, and in some ways certain groups of folks have less access. And so much of that access, I think, depends on access to technology. So what does it mean if you don't have that? What might that access look like? How might that feel different? So I think it's just a cool question as we think about it. And probably if we even looked at the products that are surrounding us right now, I'm looking at my phone. If I took off my clothes, which I will not do, it's not quite that exciting, I would notice, right, that these things were probably not made here. So even in terms of the things we use and wear and eat, we're kind of in a transnational world, right? My guess is that, especially in a month or so, we're all going to be eating fruits from a different place, maybe even a different country, maybe even a different continent. A lot of the products we use every day, whether it's a cell phone or something else, or the clothes we wear, are from somewhere else. So even when it's not on our minds, it's sort of in our hands and on our bodies. What does that mean? And how does that allow us to think about things? So it's just a great, really complex question that I think is just going to get even more complex. This is old data already, because we're in the midst of doing a census right now. So census data always lags. So this data is a little laggy, but we can see that our communities are changing and growing, right? And Hispanic communities, Black communities, Asian communities are growing, and we're going to see, once we get the new census data, I think we're going to see that trend continue. So we're moving away from the space in which most of our country is white folks, and that, I think, is bringing a real richness, and is probably also bringing opportunities to bump up against each other, right, and have strife and conflict as we learn how to work together. So, and again, you can ignore your why. I think, what this means for all of us is, I think these changing demographics give us additional opportunities to build relationships. I think that they call on us, though, to have a greater awareness and greater skills in order to affect be more effective in interacting with folks, right, who might be different from us. I think we have to personally grow to have those relationships. And this is sort of the textbook, or this course's definition of cultural competence. So it's not the best definition, it's just a definition. But really, when we talk about cultural competence, what we mean is it's a set of skills, abilities, behaviors, attitudes, leadership qualities, and/or policies that come together across a variety of spaces and encourage and enable the effective practice of relevancy, humility, awareness, sensitivity, and respect across all differences in cultural belief, language, national origins, socioeconomics, age, gender, educational level, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, styles of learning, appearance, lifestyle, and there's that famous etc., because this list is not exhaustive. And I think the trickiest thing about this, and I always say this in the other course, Dimensions of Diversity, is this can feel really easy, but it also means folks who I disagree with. So it's not just everyone I like. It also means my weird uncle, who has strong opinions about whether or not women should be in roles of leadership. So, this is the trick, right? It's not just people we like. It's not just people who agree with us, but how do we really get in there and engage, even when someone is really pushing our buttons, even when we feel like we're on opposite sides of this conversation, so I think that's really the challenge for all of us, right? Is that sometimes it feels very easy and organic, and at other times it will be a stretch, and it will be frustrating, and it will be an opportunity to sort of learn and grow. And so really, I like this image and this way to think about cultural competency as a continuum. So really starting at ignorance, and in this diagram, that's not a bad word. So, that's not a negative thing here. It just means that when we start off, it is not even on our radar. So this is how we learn things, right? We go from a sense of, kind of not even thinking about it, to that space of incapacity. So, okay, it's occurred to me and I have no idea what to do. I do not know how to deal with this. To a space of, you know what, it doesn't even matter. So I think we hear this a little bit when we talk about race, right? So we know that one step on this continuum is folks who might say things like, I don't even see color. And I think I grew up in the 80s, and that was a statement that really I think folks felt okay about making, because what they meant was, I don't see that as a barrier. I don't see, I'm not, what they think they were saying was, I'm not racist. And I think as we've learned and we've listened to communities of color, what they've said back to us is, hey, actually, that's not what we want. We don't want you to see us as not people of color. We don't want you to pretend you don't see that. It's real. How about you see it and respect it? So, but I think that blindness, you know, are kind of, hey, you know what, it doesn't matter. We're all the same. Can be a space in our growth, right? But not the space we want to stop at. And then we kind of get to this pre-competence, like, okay, I'm feeling like I might understand some of this. Like, I think I'm getting there. To competence, to proficiency. And I would say proficiency is kind of always the North Star, right? Like, we're always learning, we're always growing. There's always something coming down the pike that we haven't thought about. So, you know, I like this sort of sense that we move through these spaces, and we do it all the time, right? Because maybe we feel really culturally competent in terms of, maybe we live in a space where there's a large Puerto Rican population and we speak Spanish, and we feel we're working closely with the culture and we feel we're really competent. But then all of a sudden someone says, we have a new member and they're transgender. And we think, oh my gosh, okay, I'm back at ignorance again, right? So this can happen at various times in various spaces. Sorry, did I just cut somebody off?
No, I was laughing.
Yes, I mean, we're all in this, you know, this kind of coil, this spiral at all times. And my guess is we're all standing in each of these spaces in a variety of times and locations, right? And we might even move not just upward, but we might move up and down, because we might think we've got it, only to realize, oh, okay, wait, I didn't understand as much as I thought I did. Maybe, you know, maybe actually I'm still here. So again, I think this is a really fluid, you can think about this as a fluid motion, but these are normal steps to go through, right? And you might have experienced some of this if you've ever moved through diversity work with a team of folks, right? So you might get folks there who right away are like, this doesn't even matter to me. I don't even see this. You might get folks who are like, I don't even know where to start. And you might get folks who feel like, hey, I feel pretty fluent here. So I think it's just a nice reminder that we move through these spaces, and that movement is normal. And sometimes we might feel like we move backward, because sometimes the more we know, the more we sort of realize we don't know. I think that I could entitle that all of like my being in my 40s reminds me all the time, okay, maybe I don't know as much as I think I did here. But I think that's a normal experience too, right? That we might start the work feeling really competent and ultimately think, oh, actually, you know, maybe I'm not quite, maybe there's more to know here. So I think that, you know, feel really free to move through these variety of spaces. So again, what would it look like if we were in an organization that was culturally competent? I think these would be some of the signs: evaluation of other folks' cultures, an understanding that our communities may be changing in a variety of ways, building bridges between, I use the word organization here, but building bridges between cultures that we may be working with, intentionally engaging with folks who may not sort of be at the dance, so to speak. So kind of continually asking that question, not only who's at the table, but who's not at the table. You know, what voices, what cultures, what kind of cultural lenses might be missing. And then models and promotes behavior that's unbiased and without stereotype and discrimination. Not an easy thing to do. I would say this is another kind of thing that we're always going to be pushing toward, right? Because once we feel like we've dismantled that in one area, you know, I think we'll realize there's more areas. So to me, it's kind of like an onion. You could peel the layers and peel the layers and peel the layers, and that the work is probably always ongoing. And it's going to change, right? Because our communities are not static. Our communities also change. And to Hartley's point, they might actually get bigger. So our communities might just not be the folks who are literally physically close to us, but they might all of a sudden be folks we're working with who are in different spaces, in different times, living in different physical communities, but become part of our larger virtual community, and therefore the change is unlimited. And so this is, again, not really a sexy definition of culture, but just a basic definition. So in this course, we define culture as the beliefs, values, norms, and traditions that affect individuals, how individuals of a particular group perceive, think, interact, behave, and make judgments about the world. So very basic definition, but when we use culture sort of today, this is sort of the blanket definition. It's learned and collective. So we're not born with it. It's the reason that we have differences in culture, right? And a lot of that might happen to be because of where you are. So the things that are part of our culture are not something that's necessarily part of someone else's culture. It's partly shared with people who live within our same social environment because we learn it. So you might all have aspects of your sort of family of birth that become kind of a cultural norm. One of my favorite sort of BuzzFeed articles becomes people sharing things that were normal in their families of birth, but that they later find out they were the only ones who did. And we probably all had experiences like that, right? Just something that you grew up thinking, everybody does it this way, and then you kind of got out into the world and realized, oh no, that was just us. So there are things we share as a culture because we're in the US. There are things that you probably share within your intimate family group. There are things you may share within a friend group. You might not be from here, so there are things that are very as someone who's not born and bred Minnesotan, there are things that are very Minnesotan that I would, identify as Minnesota culture. I'm a New Yorker. There's definitely some things, right, that are part of being a culture of New York. So even within the same state, it can be community driven. It's the collective programming of the mind that distinguishes one group of people from another. And that doesn't mean that I don't mean culty programming. It's just that we are taught to think this way, right? So it's shared thinking, it's shared practice. And it's distinguished from human nature and our individual personality, although there is overlap, right? So it's not something we're born knowing how to do. It's not the reflex of the knee, which we are born with. And it's not the fact that maybe you're bossy. That's your individual personality. But it might overlap with both of those things, right? So this is something we share. And I like this a lot. So if we think about this as a pyramid, human nature would be at the bottom. So, right, these are the things that are universal. We would see as part of our human nature. So you might think about something like fight, flight, or freeze, right? That's sort of part of our biological animal human nature that's built into us. And that's part of what we carry with us. It doesn't matter where you're born or what your experiences are. But then there's that middle category, so specific to a group or category and learned. So I would suggest that something like part of our American culture, which we'll talk about later, is I think we have a concept of individualism and individual success, right? So you may agree or disagree, but that kind of concept of the American dream, right? So if you work hard, you will be successful at some point. So again, I think we've poked some holes in that, but it is part of what sort of the ethos of being an American, right? That's cultural, right? It's not common to all cultures. That's a part of our culture here. And then on the top, there's your personality. So it's specific to you. Part of it might be inherited and part of it might be learned. So I don't know whether I was, part of me being a bossy person is the fact that I'm the oldest child in my family. And part of it might just be that I was born that way, probably both. So we can think about, my personality plus culture plus human nature. So this is all the parts. And this middle part is sort of where we are today focusing. And this is Hofstede's work. So that kind of base of the course being built around that work. And we can think about this as well as sort of our beliefs, our values, our behavioral norms, and our symbols and heroes, right? So what we believe, what we say we value, how we behave in general, and what becomes normative. And then on the outside of that, what are some of our symbols and heroes who kind of represent that? So we'll just talk, we won't share here, or we won't break into small groups. But would anyone want to share a symbol or hero from our culture and think about what that symbol or hero might tell us about our culture?
Well, I would say it's not mine personally, but now my family. My husband is from Finland, Minnesota, and St. Urho is a very big part of their culture as a hero, a slash celebratory event. And that's been very fascinating for me
Ooh, so tell us about the saint and like what they, who are they? How do they behave? What do they represent?
Yeah. It, as far as I know, is made up. It's not real.
Okay.
And so it's a story about how there was grasshoppers, I think, that somehow were taking over. Somebody else would probably story better. But something about grasshoppers and grapes. And so Saint Urho helped push out the grasshoppers, I guess, to save the grapes.
Oh, so
That
sort
could
of
be totally inaccurate.
sort of a person versus nature. Person wins. Interesting. Yeah.
Of
So
course,
what do you
there's
think
a,
oh, Mike, do you know
Well,
about
Troy
of
knows
it.
it better.
part of the reason that story is a little strange is Finland isn't exactly known for grapes.
It's all make believe as far as I know. Like, there's no part of it that is people have like. There's things that have more foundation. It doesn't feel like this one even does. It's like a reason to celebrate.
So interesting. Yeah, what else? Anyone have a thought about a culture or a sort of symbol or a hero who you think reveals something about our American culture? Oh,
Well, Paul
yeah.
Bunyan, Paul
Oh.
Bunyan, of course, just as real as Saint Urho.
Yeah, Paul Bunyan. And what do you think, like, what do you think he ultimately represents?
I guess it's that human overtaking the woods. You know, that we are control. We are the control. It's the old biblical things that you shall dominate the earth kind of thing.
Yeah, sort of a rugged individualism. And I will definitely say, you know, I know that the birthplace of Paul Bunyan is a debated topic, but it is definitely alive and well here in Minnesota, right? We didn't talk as much about Paul Bunyan in New York, I know, because he's from here. But yeah, definitely a really, literally larger than life symbol, right? And Hartley, you had a Disney.
Yeah, I have a young friend that I read bedtime stories to at night via Zoom. And this was my book when my sister and I were little. And so we've been working our way through this. And it's so weird now to read it as an adult person. And I have to like change things on the fly a lot of the times, because it's like, oh my gosh, I can't, we can't talk about Native American, you know, like the whole Peter
Yeah.
Pan thing, and there's a weird, and then we finished Sleeping Beauty last night, and it was the stories of what it meant for this young woman to become a person. It was just really strange. Like, I didn't even realize that her mother doesn't even have a name. They never even, all the men in the story have names, and she doesn't even get a name. So it's interesting to me to see these, I don't know if we would call them, they're not certainly heroes, but they are symbols
Yeah.
of our culture, and how grateful I am that it feels weird now,
Yeah.
and that it's different, because
Yeah.
you know, in the 1970s, I didn't even question.
Yeah,
Why
I
would
love
I?
that. Yeah, so I love that you brought that up, because our relationship to these symbols and you know, quote unquote heroes or role models in some way, I think they were sometimes, you know, we grew up with them, can change over time. And it speaks to, I think, our own changing and evolving awareness, right, of, you know, of cultural competency, really, you know, and how we view these things. Yeah, thank you. And, you know, talk about something that was really so widely shared, even globally, right? Disney has created a lot of characters who become very beloved. And yeah, Kelsey was just putting in the chat, brands as a symbol of culture. Absolutely. You know, I love that too. And I love that definition, you know, people like us do things like this. Thanks for that. Hartley, that's awesome. Yeah, like you know, this is how we define culture. But yeah, I think, you know, I think to myself all the time, because it's still there. And, you know, the times I've been to Disney World as an adult, but that Small World ride, right? Which is, you know, you sit in this tiny boat and you go through this and you see all these very stereotypical, they're dolls, but, you know, they're like every continent has its stereotype of little dolls and they're all dancing and they have other stereotypical, and now it seems just really reductive and problematic. But I think at the time it was really intended to be this celebration of a variety of cultures, and the message is supposed to be that, you know, we're all in this together. It's really not that big of a world. But, you know, now when you go through and you see the folks in Africa, you know, holding a monkey, and you see the Swedish people and they're all blonde, and, you know, it seems sort of ridiculously reductive. But again, you know, we're moving and growing and all the time. Awesome. Yeah, so you can keep thinking about things you might see that, you know, tell us some things about our culture. So these are the 8 cultural lenses that we're going to talk really quickly about today. And the 3 green ones are added to this course. They're not Hofstede's, so those are additions. So the lenses we're going to kind of talk a little bit about are historical background, power distance, individualism and collectivism, competitive cooperative lens, the uncertainty avoidance lens, faith, spirituality, and secularism, time orientation, and generational aspects. So probably not exhaustive, but I think a wide range of lenses that cover a variety of things. So to start off with the historical background lens, so really we'll define this as its personal culture influenced by the historical nature of our country of origin. It could definitely be influenced by colonialism. Either do we have a history, you know, of colonialism, or have we been the subjects of colonialism? Could definitely have a relationship between our own country of origin and the US if we are not from here. So, you know, when you're interacting with this lens, to think of what is this person's historical background, and how would this person's historical background influence their relationship with us or with the organization? And I'll give an example of something that we really were not thinking about at the Y, which is that at the Y, we love camping. It's a big part of the work we do, overnight camping. We think it's great. We think kids should be in nature. We love camps. It's, you know, and we didn't ever stop to think about the fact that the word camp can mean something totally different to someone who spent some time in, for example, a Sudanese refugee camp. The word camp in that regard does not have a happy, carefree, running through nature connotation. It means something really different. And we've definitely, I think in the past few years, interacted with groups of folks who didn't feel really happy and welcome when we said the word camp, and their initial thought wasn't what we always thought. And I don't think we really paid a lot of attention to that we were having folks come who, again, had spent some time in refugee camps, and that the idea of sending their children away to camp didn't sound happy or great, actually sounded like something really traumatic. So just being aware of that was a total aha for us. I don't know that we'd ever really considered that before, but it was an example of the way in which a group's, you know, background, historical background with this was impacting their feelings about us talking about camp. And certainly the same might be true for folks who maybe lived through Japanese internment camps. So again, I think that was kind of an awareness for us about how history and your history with something might really impact your feeling about that, even something we thought was just purely happy. Anyone else have any sort of experiences or things that this brings to mind when they think about the kind of historical background lens, what that might mean? I felt this a lot too. I've spent some time several years ago working and living in a rural village in Tanzania. And I happened to be, at that time, the only white person in the village, which was totally fine, and folks were wonderful. But I would often walk around and folks would shout out to me, Mzungu, white person, or USA. And I would think to myself, oh man, am I the physical representation of the United States in Africa? Like, I have a lot of complex feelings about that. And, you know, wow, what might that mean, right? How might folks feel about that? And again, folks were very kind to me, but I remember feeling the weight of that. You know, I don't know if I want to be the physical embodiment of the U.S. and its relationship with Africa over history. You know, and what might that feel like to folks? And might my presence feel good or feel, you know, like something that wasn't good to folks? So I think it's interesting to consider, and to even, you know, sometimes it makes us stop and think about the things we've taken for granted. Again, our thinking about camp as only a positive thing, or this very happy experience. Maybe just recognizing even the words we use might have carry different weight, or have different valuations for folks as they move through things. So I'm going to skip this because we're going to do one in a second. So a second lens, and I think, again, this is one as Americans we're not good at thinking about, is power distance. So we can think about the power distance lens as socioeconomic status, education, and relationships with authority and access to decision making. We can talk about sort of high power distance or low power distance cultures by talking about the sort of equitability or the inequitable distribution of resources and the community response. And we think about this in the way that relationships might value equity versus formal and economic division of power. So, for example, how comfortable or uncomfortable is someone in relation to differences in socioeconomic status, education, authority, and decision making? And how might we see that play out? So, anybody's thoughts about whether the US is a sort of high power distance culture or a low power distance culture?
Well, obviously from beyond what happened this summer, we know that the United States is a country with a huge differences in socioeconomic status. I don't think there's a lot of argument about that.
Yeah, and really, you know, although you're absolutely correct, and yet we would also in some ways consider ourselves, when we compare ourselves to a culture like Japan, which has a lot of formalized rules about power distance, many people would say that America is a low power distance culture, but you're right, what do we mean by that? And how do factors like race and sex and gender play into that, right? And how we interact with folks in power. So if we were in a room together, I'd ask you to sort of space yourselves out in the room and place yourselves in relation to your answer to this question. But some of the sort of questions that can help you think about yourself in relation to this might be, a new job opening is announced. If you would seek out the hiring manager to tell him or her why you think you'd be an amazing fit, you know, you put yourself on one side of the room, but if you would wait to be asked to apply, you'd put yourself on the other, right? So approaching them would be pretty low power distance. Waiting to be approached because someone had more authority would be pretty high power distance. And some of this, of course, inevitably also has to do with our personalities. But I think that's an example. Another one might be performance review time. If you feel no problem shouting yourself out and talking about all the amazing things you've done this year, you know, that would be a little bit more low power distance. If you're going to sort of be quiet about your own accomplishments for fear of seeming like you think you're too great, that'd be a little bit more high power distance. And I'll say, as a New Yorker, I view Minnesotans, this is a very broad statement, so, you know, only take it broadly. Minnesotans, I think, are not apt to shout themselves out, right? You're a high performing but humble culture here. I think East Coasters tend to be a little bit more bold about shouting themselves out. So these things can vary even, you know, in the micro communities within the United States, right? And certainly factors, as Barbara mentioned, there are other factors playing in here. I would suggest that race and sex play big parts about whether we might shout ourselves out, right? That we've been taught to talk about ourselves in certain ways. And we've been taught as certain groups to talk about ourselves more or less. So again, those are some things you can think about and pay attention to sort of how that is. But this can be, you know, certainly I think in the workplace, I think this can come up a lot. We might, as a hiring manager, we might see one of our employees is not that interested in promotion, when in reality, they may be interested, just not feeling comfortable kind of approaching us, right? That high power differential. Or we may see someone else as being quote unquote aggressive. And are we more likely to stick that label on a woman or a person of color if they seek advancement than we are to put that label on someone else? You know, so I think those are things to think about. And even has things to do with, we've heard this play out in schools sometimes, this idea in our culture that eye contact is a symbol of respect. In other cultures is not similarly, right? So I've had folks who are teachers that I know in my life who feel like kids aren't making eye contact with them and want to think that the kids aren't paying attention, when in reality, that student's, you know, home culture taught them that eye contact was pretty aggressive. So that a symbol of respect was to not make eye contact. So again, you know, the things we assume all folks might have might show up differently in the folks that we serve and the folks that we interact with. And we can kind of check some of our assumptions about what that means and how we think about what their motivation might be. So I like this lens because I think it's something that shows up a lot in life, and we might make assumptions about whether folks are engaged, whether they are interested in promotion, all of those things based on some of this power distance lens. So individualism and collectivism, I think this is one that is a very familiar one with the US. So would you say that we're an individualistic culture, or are we a collectivist culture?
Individualistic.
Yeah, I think of this as sort of part of the DNA of the story of America, right? Like everybody, you know, if you work hard, you can succeed. That's kind of our thing. And there's a lots of kind of keeping up with the Joneses, you know, working individually. I think this certainly, though things change over time. I spent some time living and working in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is the second largest and not often talked about city in Massachusetts, but it's an old factory town. It's an old immigrant town. And almost all the houses there are triple-decker houses because families, immigrant families often would come and live in multiple generations in the same house, right? So literally every floor was the mirror of the floor below it. So you could have grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, kids, right? Everyone living together, close enough to share some resources, but with some privacy. I think you can see this kind of individualism in our culture, even in the way that we've thought about housing, right? And building housing and individual housing and owning land. So in the kind of culture that's individualistic, there's social ties are a little bit loose. People are expected to look after themselves versus more of a collectivism. So folks are integrated into and loyal to maybe more extended families and strong cohesive groups. I have a trainer who I train this class with sometimes from Minneapolis, and he's Chinese. And he tells a story about how in his family, he and his wife bought a house, and then they invited his parents over to see the house. And his parents didn't talk to them for a full year afterward because in his culture and his family, his parents 100% expected to be a part of the decision-making about buying the house. And the fact that they weren't invited to be a part of that decision-making with he and his wife really was a break in their norm and in their cultural values. So they really felt as though they were left out of a decision that should have been a family decision. They all should have had a voice in it. And, you know, they did get back together. He did make it up to them. But for him, you know, that was just a reminder that he sort of straddles two cultures here. And so I think we can think about this and think about the ways in which it'll be very interesting to see, you know, do economic pressures move us back into more of a collectivist approach? I think there's some discussion about whether that will happen, but certainly you can think about other cultures and other groups who do operate more collectively as a team. Any questions about this? All right. So I want you to think individually. Just take a moment to do this activity. So, you know, folks can answer as they see, but where are you personally? Because we certainly have different stances on this personally, right? Where are you personally in the individualist collectivist continuum? We're not going to work in small groups, but do you see yourself as sort of more individual, or do you often turn to a group of folks, trusted folks, to make key decisions with you, whether that's your family or maybe a trusted group of friends? Where are you?
I probably slide more towards the, not probably, I do slide more towards the collectivist
Okay.
continuum.
How does that play out in your life? Like, would you give us an example?
My sister and brother-in-law are considering buying a new house. So it's not just me, it's my family. And she invited me to go with them last night. You know, you said the house, that made me think about it. And it's not that I have, you know, the decision will ultimately be theirs, but it just seemed absolutely natural that she asked me to come and then ask my opinion.
Love that.
They'll make the decision, but they requested my input.
Yeah, I like that.
And it never occurred to me. It was like, yeah, I'll go, sure. That seemed, why wouldn't I?
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great example. Anybody else?
I think of myself as a person that makes my decisions very individually. I suppose that's a very American trait. Like, I don't need anybody else to make the decision, but that I currently am living in a kind of multi-generational housing dynamic. And a lot of the COVID things have shown me that a lot of our choices have impact bigger than ourselves. Not that wasn't true before, but so much more clear. And so more of our decision making right now is being collectively decided. And that is sort of a weirder place, because what happens if somebody doesn't agree with you or wants something different? And then you have to be, which is very Minnesota, right? Like, what if I then have to make my own individual decision that they don't agree with? And where are we at then if we can't come to a common ground? So,
Ooh, yeah, I love that you brought that up, because that's such a thing of the moment, right? And I just was watching, you know, got pulled into watching one of those angry videos yesterday where, you know, a customer is behaving horribly. So there's like a whole genre, right, of things right now. But yeah, what a great example of the individual bumping up against the collective, right? And this particular angry man who was not his best day was shouting, you know, what about my rights? What about, you can't tell me what to do? What about and the sort of business folks were saying, you know, sorry, this is the collective rule. So thank you. That's a great example of this right now. You know, what does it mean for us to have to think collectively and to maybe have to make sacrifices about how we move or wearing a mask, and how that bumps up against this idea that, you know, we should be able to do what we want. And, you know, so yeah, that's perfect example of in the moment how we're wrestling with this. And maybe part of the reason it's been such a challenge here in this country, right? Like, it's really been a challenge for folks to make peace with that. Thank you. That was so good. Yeah.
I think that also, as the oldest child in my family, I am an individualist in that I'm able to do a lot of things on my own. However, and I don't know if it's an inherited, it's probably through basic lack of confidence in myself. I need help making decisions on a lot of things, from small to large. And so need to get a lot of opinions to weigh to make a decision. But at the same time, and I think this is a cultural thing, partly from my father, Scandinavian Minnesota, or him, but I'm also strongly believe that there needs to be a fairness for all people. So a collective dimension in that also.
Love that. Yeah, and of course, this is a crazy Venn diagram, right? Where we all move in this sort of ocean of the US culture, but then we have our family culture and our family position and our individual personalities and all the experiences we've had, right? So, you know, it's all layered on top of each other, but yeah, I love that. And it can be hard to sort of tease these out. So again, I think this, oh, sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to cut you
Well,
off.
one thing hit me. I've been watching many of Ken Burns shows recently, and I also watched the interview of Ken Burns last week. And one of the one thing that stuck with me particularly, when he was doing his interview at public TV, they sign on the wall outside the green room, just their name and a little slogan or something. And he put "More Unum, Ken Burns." Well, what does that mean? Well, our national slogan is "E pluribus unum," which means out of the many one. And sort of turning this around the other way, he said we need more of the one. So we need more of that collectivist continuum in our culture. We're spread out too many. We have too many individuals. Too many individuals that say this is my right to do whatever I want, and we see that in the masking issue is one of the things right now, that it's a right to infect other people. Oh yeah? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think this is playing out so clearly right now. I love that story about Ken Burns. To me, again, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts, but the fifth lens is competitive cooperative. So competitive cultures often value competition, assertiveness, ambition, personal wealth, and cooperative cultures often value shared leadership, relationships, quality of life, and social performance. So I think, again, you can view this through a lot of different lenses. Would you say that we are more competitive or cooperative?
Oh yeah, I think we're very competitive.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we see this play out a little bit in everything from youth sports and at the Y, there's always an ongoing debate. You know, there's folks who feel like everybody should be ranked and there's folks who feel like nobody should win. And, you know, but I think we see that. Of course, this also really plays into other lenses, other power dynamics, and our own individual dimensions of diversity, right? I think we've rewarded men and women differently for that competitiveness. I'm certainly rewarded white folks and folks of color differently. So really, I think we can see this play out in a variety of different ways. But I would agree that we have often valued kind of personal ambition and personal wealth. I started my life as a professor of literature, so I always love to think too about if anyone knows the Horatio Alger stories about Ragged Dick. So Ragged Dick was a poor street urchin. This is a story, of course. And in these Horatio Alger novels, which not coincidentally are written around the time of the Depression, Ragged Dick works hard and he, you know, makes something of himself, right? So the message is that Ragged Dick, even though he's so sad, purely because he, you know, literally that's where the phrase "pick yourself up by your bootstraps," you know, he works hard and he succeeds. And so this idea, right, that anyone can succeed as long as they work hard enough, I think has a lot to do, and we know that's a myth, but I think has a lot to do with this kind of competitive lens that we have in our culture, right? If you just worked harder, if you just did more, you would have all the things you dream of, and you would be very wealthy, of course, because that would be a part of it.
Now, the story that I recall from the 60s probably is, yes, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. What if you don't have any shoes?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And I think that, you know, we're getting better at having those discussions about equity, right? So, you know, we're not all starting at the same starting line. You're right. You know, what if you are missing the very basic things? What if you don't have shoes? What if you have two left shoes? What if you have the wrong size shoes? What if, you know, that kind of assumption that we don't all get, you know, we don't all have the exact same things, and we might need different things and different amounts of things to be successful, right?
I remember Garrison Keillor told one story about he came from a large family and there were hand-me-down clothes. And one of the hand-me-downs he had to wear one year was his sister's jeans, which had zippers along the side. And it was very embarrassing for him. But that was, you know, for a poor family, that wouldn't have been too unusual to have to wear hand-me-downs that weren't even of their gender.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it is, again, really, you know, that cooperative lens, right? Having what we need, what do we need? And that our value is somehow attached to sort of what we have. Yeah, thanks. So the sixth lens is uncertainty avoidance. So this is defined as a society's tolerance for uncertainty. So the extent that its members feel either uncomfortable or comfortable in unstructured situations. Cultures that avoid uncertainty appreciate punctuality and schedules. Cultures which avoid uncertainty try to minimize anxiety by having strict laws and security measures. So you might ask yourself, if you're thinking about this lens, how comfortable or uncomfortable is someone in unstructured situations? And maybe where your business falls or where you fall on the uncertainty scale. And what happens when you're with folks who are in a different place? So again, an example to me is, as I said, I spent a couple months living and working in a rural village in Tanzania, and there's no water, running water, or electricity. And so needless to say, there was meeting up with someone was not strictly time-based. There was no real ability to know at any given time in that village exactly what time it was. You could tell by what the sun was doing, if the sun was out. But I remember one day I was out in another part of the village and I came back and someone said, someone's been waiting to see you. And I said, well, how long has he been here? And they said, he's been here for a few hours. And my first thought was like, oh my gosh, I kept someone waiting for a few hours. That's horrible. Except that actually in that village, it wasn't that unusual because there's no real way to say when we're going to meet up. We might agree that it's going to be tomorrow, but we have to walk to that section of the village, which might take different amounts of time depending on the weather or what we're carrying. Things might change. So there was a large amount of, it was perfectly normative in that particular village that you might spend a few hours waiting for someone, and while you're there, you could visit with other folks or do something, but it wasn't like, we're gonna meet at 3 and at 3:15, you know, I'm gonna leave. And that was definitely a weird moment for me as an American who's used to, you know, scheduling things, sometimes scheduling things in increments of 15 minutes, being able to know what time it is at all times, you know, that idea that it's rude to make folks wait. So just because of the availability of certain things in that particular village, there was not an ability to sort of make specific time-based plans, you know, when time was conceived of a little bit differently. So what would you say about us here in the US? Are we okay with uncertainty? Are we not okay with uncertainty? What do you think?
My impression is that we pretend we're okay, and that we really are not okay. So like, we like the ability to be like, you could do anything with your life, that whatever you make of the moment is what, like, it's you, what you put into it is what's supposed to happen. But that uncertainty in the part that you can't control it, we don't like the lack of control. So that's
okay.
What does everybody else think?
I'm wondering if, and I'm wondering about this, now that I'm older, although I think even when I was younger, I was more structured. But since we now have these different generations, which have names, and they're in the workplace together, and people are looking at the impact that the generations have on each other. And in one hand, I think you could look at it as older generations being more comfortable in a structured situation where younger generations, and here I'm just not sure, I can't totally speak to it, but it's kind of an observation that they can be more comfortable in unstructured situations. And so there is some clash of culture going on between these generations, which are now in the same place. And the younger generations aren't necessarily accustomed to the structure, the hierarchical leadership structure, shall we say, in the corporate world. And so this is something that's being examined certainly in the United States and probably in a lot of the world also.
Ooh, I like that. And you're going to see, you're telling the future a little bit, Barbara, because you're going to see that crop up here as one of our lenses. But I love that you brought that up, right? Because of course, as we said, there's sort of our culture broadly, but there's your family culture, there's your family position, there's your personality. So I'm someone who likes to, investigate 45 Airbnbs and make lots of plans. I know of folks who have just hopped on a plane and gotten off in a foreign country and made plans. That's probably something that would drive me wild. I would not be able to handle that. But yeah, so, our generation, our personality, our family structure, even maybe our space in our lives, right? What's going on with us? Sometimes it can be a little bit easier to be okay with uncertainty if we feel pretty stable in some ways. I think about that in terms of the youth we serve. A lot of the kids we serve live in pretty uncertain households. There might not be food, there might not be a set structure. That means that sometimes when they're in our program, they really love having a set structure and a set schedule, and changing that at the last minute can feel really scary. So yeah, I think this is a really interesting one that might have a lot of different factors, including generational.
Tara, does this have, would this have anything to do with someone's interest in being exposed to new information? Would that,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
if someone sought out, I want to know more about other people. I just want to learn new things in general. Well, that's kind of like constantly stepping into uncertain areas, versus that makes me really uncomfortable. I'm going to stick with things that feel certain and sure and known.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, what does it mean? I think if you are going to be a lifelong learner, you do have to be comfortable with that uncertainty, right? Because that is a part of learning. I'm going to lean forward into something that I don't know a lot about, and be willing to kind of always have that experience of a little bit of uncertainty. I like that. Yeah.
Right at the beginning of the pandemic, I read something about like what America or what Americans can learn from like a refugee or a war torn about dealing with this uncertainty, all these things that we kind of have as expectations that are givens, and like here are some things you could work on, or here's some things you should know. And I was trying to look for the article to put it in the line, but maybe somebody read it too.
Share it if you can find it. That's awesome.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I love that. And great point too, right? We are maybe in a moment right now where it feels like some of the things we've been really certain about, or maybe have been unexamined, we're suddenly a little bit less certain about. And how folks might be feeling and what the impact of that might be. Certainly a faith, spirituality, secularism lens, a culture's religions or faiths or their absence, and its impact on behavioral norms, right? And that can show up in a lot of different ways. And again, we are in a space right now where multiple faith beliefs might be coming together, and what does that look like? What does that feel like, in order to create space where maybe they can all come together, and how that might impact the way we behave. And we see some of these things again, even embedded in certain aspects of our history, for sure, and the assumptions that we tend to make about folks, for sure, as well. Our time orientation lens. So are we long-term or short-term? So long-term orientation encourages thrift, savings, we're going to work hard toward results, and a willingness to subordinate oneself to a purpose. Short-term orientation might be more consistent with spending to keep up with social pressure, living for the moment, wanting quick results, a concern for sort of looking, better in the short term versus the long term. So would you say we're a short-term or a long-term time-oriented culture? Or maybe your answer is both in different ways.
Well, it's very normal for Americans to have mortgages that can be 30 years long. So that's a long-term planning thing. But people also have to pay bills monthly and look at what their daily expenses are. So there's just in terms of money, there's a whole range.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are, I was just talking with my husband the other day. I had posed a question, if you could go back to any time in history, would you? And it quickly evolved into us discussing how difficult certain things would be. we wouldn't even have to go back very far. So I said to him, you know, when my grandmother did the laundry, it literally took her all day. She had a Wringer washing machine, and, you know, for their family, she would wake up in the morning and she'd be doing laundry till that night. And he said, well, my great grandmother did laundry in the creek, like in a river. So we, you know, immediately started thinking, you know, and now it's normative to me, of course, that I can throw a load of laundry in and then go do something else. And I can do multiple loads of laundry a day. It doesn't really, not very labor intensive, you know, so, you know, I think I thought of even just something as simple as that, and how for my grandmother, that was a big chunk of time, or food preparation or storage, right? And what she had to do to make meals, to can things, to help that family survive, versus the things that I have available to me really immediately. So, you know, it's interesting. And I think we can see different aspects of this as certain things have become more convenient. And yet, as Mike said, we're still saving for retirement in a lot of cases, paying long-term mortgages. So it's a really interesting, I think, to think about this and how it might play out differently, or maybe, again, simultaneously. I taught myself to can a couple summers ago, and it was great. I did it sort of for kicks. My grandmother probably hated doing it. She did it so that they could, you know, eat through the winter, and it was probably a total pain. But again, just one of those things that I had the luxury of learning how to do that for fun. If it was a failure, no one was going to go hungry, versus, you know, that was something that was just a part of her life because it had to be. So again, you know, even I think the skills we learn, the skills we value, not too many people are making clothing anymore. Maybe there's been a little bit of a renaissance, but that, you know, some folks think that's a really valuable skill, right? But in a time where we can buy things pretty cheaply, dispose of them pretty cheaply, that kind of mending and sewing and making is maybe not as valued as it once was. Interesting to think about. And then Barbara already saw into the future, but this generational aspect lens. So yeah, kind of, you know, how are we situated in terms of generations, and how might that impact some of the ways we look at things? So we've got, and there are many different general breakdowns here. So there might be ones with slightly different years, but here's a sort of rough outline of some generations. You know, what assumptions do we make about folks? How do we feel? You know, what might we have had access to? I'm sort of on the cusp of Gen X. I'm a Zennial officially, but I identify as very strongly Gen X because I had an analog childhood and a digital adulthood. So I think about that a lot, and the fact that I don't think of myself as a native speaker of technology, but I have to use it a lot. Whereas some of the folks I work with now are native speakers, right? Like some of the younger folks, you know, or your kids might be native speakers. They might have grown up with computers and access to technology. I still remember getting a 5-minute at a time computer time. And I think about that a lot. So, you know, I think that this is, and as Barbara mentioned, we might have spaces, workspaces and other spaces where all of these generations are kind of coming together, which can be really great, but can also lead to differences, right? Differences in the way we communicate, differences in the way we expect to be communicated with, differences in our comfort with a variety of things. You know, that can really sort of differences in the history that we've had or the things that we've lived through. So I think that this is a really interesting one as folks are living longer, right? We're getting more generations all together, working and talking and learning. And then really, you know, again, I know we've moved quickly today, but these are the 8 cultural lenses. They're not exhaustive, but I think they're just 8 things we can keep in mind as we interact with other folks, right? So often, I think sometimes we might have an interaction with someone and it feels off, or it feels like we're missing something. And I think sometimes what might be at play is some of these things, right? And sometimes they're things we think about, sometimes they're things we're not thinking about. And certainly we are all operating with these lenses too, right? So they affect the ways in which we communicate, the things that we feel, our own preferences, the ways in which we move through situations. So I think it's great to keep them in mind as just another tool in your toolkit and as a way to think about things. And I think the challenge for all of us is, how do we do our best to ensure that our responses are culturally competent? How do we try to observe and not judge? That's a challenge for all of us. And what do we need to do differently to ensure that we're building and maintaining relationships? Or, you know, again, I love that question as a driving question. Who's not around the table? And I mean, the table's metaphorical, but whose voices are here? Whose voices are not here? Is there more that we could do to welcome additional voices? Is there something we're not thinking about? I think the answer is always yes. There's always something we're not thinking about. So how can we push ourselves to be thoughtful about these things? Welcome, invite folks to the dance, invite folks to dance with us. And as Hartley said, lean into some of that discomfort of learning, right? Hopefully it's not an extreme discomfort, but you know, what is that slight discomfort that is the really rich space of learning and growing and continually becoming aware of additional things? And that is a very fast romp through cultural lenses today. I want to be respectful of people's time, but I think Kelsey will share my contact info. So if you would like, happy to share the slide deck with you. Happy to share, there's a participant guide that's a little bit more robust, so happy to share links to those things with folks. And always just happy to continue the conversation. So email me anytime, you can call me anytime. But it's been really great. I think it's always rich to have these conversations, and I really appreciate all of your time today and getting to know each of you a little bit.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much for
Thank you,
bringing
Sarah. This was great.
Sarah.
I would do want to let,
It was more than I expected. Thank you.
Oh, good.
I do want to let people know that we will be offering a training on equity that will be coming up, I believe, in October. And so more information will be going about that. We also will have this session recorded and posted on our website, just in case somebody missed it and wants to watch it in the future, if you want to slow it down some. I also wanted to, just in reaction to some things I've been hearing out there, I was telling Sarah at the beginning of our chat today that I've been hearing a lot about how we can work on bringing kind of this divide of people together. And this is sort of in reaction to some of the governmental statements recently about training related to diversity. And this is sort of, just so you know about it, diversity and related trainings could help bridge these divides and teach people the language necessary to strengthen communication. That requires building viewpoint diversity into their core. And I think that's the key piece, is this viewpoint diversity. And that in turn involves recognizing that reasonable people can differ in how they think about sensitive topics. So we aren't specifically offering a training at this point on viewpoint diversity, but we might. But if you're looking for something in the future, there is going to be something offered on Thursday, October 15th, from 12:15 p.m. until 1:15 p.m. that I'll just put into the chat section, just in case anybody is interested in that concept.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for leaning in today, too. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great rest of your day.
Thank you,
Thank
Sarah.
you.
Thank you.